So the tremors started when I was 37 years old. I just gotten into a major disagreement with my husband. We were driving down McDermott and my chest started to beat rapidly. My grandmother had just passed away of heart disease, probably about 18 months prior, and I was a little nervous about the rapidness of the heartbeat. I was concerned about what was going on. I'm only 37 years old. I have a 2-year-old and a couple of preteens, and so what possibly could be going on at 37 years old? Why is my heart beating so rapidly? I started to think as we drove closer and closer to my house, what shall become of me if my heart explodes? Because it kept beating so very rapidly. I started to feel the chest pains as I came inside of my door. My husband had finally determined that what we were talking about could not have been as important as the paleness of my skin. My daughter walked up and said, "Hello, Mom, how are you doing? You don't look too good." I immediately took my wedding ring off to see if it would fit on her finger because I thought I was about to die. 37 years old, and I'm wondering exactly what is happening to me. And I realized that it was a convergence of all of the stress. It was a convergence of transitioning from one city to the next. It was a convergence of having a new marriage. It was a convergence of having children who were becoming teenagers and being a mom to a toddler. It was too much all at one time, but what I did not recognize is that I was on the precipice of a midlife crisis. Well, I can see it in your face and you're wondering, how does one who's 37 years old enter into a midlife crisis? Well, Carl Jung helped me with that last semester in Modern Man in Search of a Soul. He reminded me that between the ages of 35 and 40, one can actually enter into what is called a midlife transition. And so since the tremors started, and since my heart was beating rapidly, since my wedding ring would not fit on my daughter's finger, and since my husband had decided that we probably had better change the conversation, and since I was given an extra night of sleep and no work the next day, since all of this stuff happened for me, I determined that something inside of me must have been moving about. It was something inside of me. It wasn't my external issue, it was my internal issue. I was shifting. Things on the inside of me no longer made sense. My desires were no longer the same. I had been teaching at the collegiate level for over 15 years at that point. I was secured in my position. I was celebrated for what I did. I knew my job inside and out, and I was at an internal unrest. The tremors started, and I had to really focus to try to figure out, what am I going to do with myself? How am I going to recreate myself? Because something is very wrong. Well, I enrolled into a PhD program. That's the first thing you do. You try to figure out exactly what you can learn to maybe help, heal or help deliver or help salve the burn of regular day-to-day monotony in life. And so I entered that PhD program and I found yet more questions than answers. And I started to wonder exactly what is going to fill the void that's happening, not externally, but internally. And so I determined, after moving to SMU and entering into the DLS program, that a new world of opportunity had opened up to me. I was able to look at the psyche of the soul next to what it is to be human, juxtaposed to human rights, and now in this beautiful environment, what it is to be creative. And how, Candace, how, cohort, how, world out there, how can we create who we are and who we should be at midlife? Well, first let's talk about what this has to do with you. Well, everybody in this room, except Michael, falls within the categories of what the scholars say is midlife. Between the ages of 30 and 60, and so Michael, now you are included, they say that anyone who works for a living up until retirement falls within this category of midlife. So there are different points of view about it, but I'd like to share with you a few things about how to create yourself at midlife. Well, the first thing you have to do is recognize that you're in the generative state of life, according to Erik Erikson. Now that's very interesting because generative gives you the impression that things are moving and things are happening, but I just said that in midlife, things are shifting. We would commonly think that at the beginning of life, when we are struggling to define ourselves, generally as a child or youth or young adult, when the world is our oyster, we're thinking about who are we and how do I fit into this great big world. So we have all these creative ideas about who we are. One week we're a doctor, the next week we're a lawyer, the next week we're a politician, and all of these things are real opportunities for us, and we actually have the energy to carry these things out. In fact, we go according to a prescribed pathway, and so there's not a whole lot of creativity in it because everybody kind of has to go through the same path to get to adulthood. It's very interesting because generally we choose our professions according to our cultural and social environment. So if it is norm to become a doctor because you come from a family of people who are high achievers, then that's your norm. And if it's norm for you to go into some form of political life or some sort of human rights activity, some sort of fight for your life kind of thing, because that's the environment that you come from, well, then that's great. But what happens when you come from an environment that doesn't really give you a lot of options and you still have to creatively forge your way into who it is that you were supposed to be? Well, only some of us have the brilliant parent that says, be all you can be. I'm not going to limit you. I'm not going to put boundaries on what you can do. Most of us had parents who, albeit very well-meaning, kind of crafted us into who we maybe became right around the age of 18 to 22. They had a big influence on that thing. And so what's very interesting about that is that at midlife, you're almost fighting against what your parents, what your society, what your culture, what your geographic location insisted that you do. So it's interesting that we look at midlife as a way to be generative, a way to create a new person, an opportunity to try to figure out, am I big C ambitious at this stage or am I little c ambitious at this stage? It's a very interesting thing to think about. It really is. Because if I'm big C ambitious and I'm at midlife, I'm going to have to find some energy, some new connections, some different ideas, some divergent thinking, something to expand my brain so that I can actually be the thing that I see in this big C kind of way, because I'm trying to impact society. I'm trying to impact the entire culture of humankind. I'm trying to make a big splash in a very, 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 very large ocean. Some of us have that kind of ambition. Most of us don't at midlife. Most of us are trying to figure out, what have I already done that can get me there? Most of us are not trying to reinvent ourselves in that way, but we have that opportunity available to us at midlife because we break beyond the confines of our childhood culture and of our young adult upbringing, because we grow up even as we're young adults, we do. But most of us probably will go this little C route, where we are impactful as it relates to our children, impactful as it relates to our community or our workplace. And what's very interesting about that in my research, particularly as it relates to Csikszentmihalyi High, is that he suggests that if you take the route of little c, it can actually end up with big C if you allow yourself to be big and creative with what you're doing in a very small microcosm situation. It's very interesting because those skills are transferable. And so it gives me hope. It gives me hope because I didn't necessarily come into the DLS program expecting to be big C. I came into the DLS program just hoping to stop the tremors. And so, what happens? Well, what am I going to do, Candace, in order to get to this big C, little c recreation of myself? What am I going to do? Well, first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to have to adjust. You have to adjust. you're going to have to start with adjusting your relationship with yourself. Very interesting thing. Last semester, I had a chance to read an author. Some of you also read him by the name of David Brooks. And he wrote a book called The Road to Character. And in The Road to Character, he talks about how Adam 1 and Adam 2 are two different kinds of people. And just a little bit of background information. Adam 1 is from the first chapter in the book of Genesis, where, God has created him and he's naming animals. He's doing big things. He's all over the place and he is the man and he is in charge. And Brooks says that is much like our young self. We grow up, we dominate, or at least we think we can dominate everything. Our ego is in charge. But then he talks about Adam 2, which is really, really remarkable because Adam 2 shows up in the third chapter of Genesis, and in Adam 2 we find more of our true nature. Adam 2 has partaken of the forbidden fruit. Sister Eve looked at him and said, "Hey, serpent told me to eat this. Here, try this." And he eats it and he's like, Next thing he knows, he's walking around looking for fig leaves and trying to figure it all out. And God says to him, "Adam, where are you?" "Lord, I'm naked. I'm naked." And he's like, "How did you know you were naked? Who told you that?" And he said, "What have you done, Adam?" And that's kind of where we are sometimes. Life kind of kicks us in a very interesting spot. And we stop thinking that we can dominate the whole world and we start entering a more reflective place. And that's what happens when we're at midlife. We start becoming more reflective. We're no longer interested in the external. We're interested in our internal. We're trying to figure out where these tremors are coming from. So Adam 1 and Adam 2 are two different people. And oftentimes we have to adjust our relationship with our inner self. We have to forgive ourselves of some things. We have to trust ourselves to try new things. We have to believe in ourselves whenever every single circumstance says, you don't have it within you. And if you did, you would have done it when you were 21, 22, 23. But my dear cohorts, my friends, there are some things that we have still to accomplish. And so true goal setting and figuring out what our goals are is a key factor. Finding a mentor, a guru, someone. I heard Treya mention in another class about a guru she met that took her on a spiritual journey. And I don't even know what the journey was, but I know I was glued to her story because I'm all into gurus. I'm all into people who know more than me because they can guide me into places I've not thought about. And even if I don't always agree with them, at least my mind has been expanded so I can take in new ideas, which means I can grow internally, not necessarily externally. Little c, not necessarily big C, and that's a beautiful thing. So, what does all this mean? It means that your road, my road, our road to creativity is multifaceted. It means that it is big C, for some of us who have big brains and big ideas. And it's also little c, for some of us who just want to stop the tremors and take care of our kiddos and have better relationships with our spouses. It's all of it. Because you know what? Divergent thinking, your spouse thinking differently than you, and your child bringing a new perspective than you, and the conflicts therein create a more rich and wonderful internal landscape. And it is there, my friends, that you will find the convergence of the divergence leading you into a more fulfilling path of creativity at midlife. Thank you all.